Right, well, let's get back to the subject, and that is time. Time is a line. Now, I'm going to use a lot of visuals or overheads this morning, and I've lost the first one that I was going to use. Thanks, Neville. See, now abideth faith, hope, and love, but the weakest of these is hope. Weakest of these is hope. And these charts are not in my book, but all the material is. And I just want to give you a little overview of the kind of thing I'm saying. Can we see that, or should we draw the curtains a bit? Can you see it all right? Okay, good. Right, timelines. Genesis 1 to 11 is prehistory as far as Israel is concerned. It's just the story so far. Prophetic history begins with Genesis 12. And we have 2,000 years of history in the Old Testament. And I like to keep a mental chart when I'm reading the Bible and slot things in. And in an oversimplified way, I just mark the 2,000 years of Hebrew history into 4 quarters. From 2000 to 1500 to 1000 to 500 to naught. And I give each of those points a title and a name. The election of God's people took place around 2000. The Exodus around 1500. The empire around 1000. And the exile around 500. And that just fixes 4 very clear milestones in the history. And I can fit the books of the Bible into the gaps. And I associate those 4 peaks with a name. Abraham around 2000, the election of Abraham. Around 1500, Moses and the Exodus. Around 1000, in fact exactly on the year 1000, David was king of the empire of Israel. And at 500, the exile I associate mostly with the prophet who covered it all, Isaiah. So that's my sort of basic outline of the timeline of Hebrew history. And then I have a line drawn on it that everything up to 1000 was on the up. And everything after 1000 was on the down. And you can actually pinpoint the afternoon on which that peak was reached. And it was the afternoon that David and Bathsheba had sex. And from that day, the line went down. It went down more rapidly than it had gone up. It took 1,000 years to go up and 500 years to go down. There are then 2 gaps to fit in. 2 gaps of 400 years each in which God said nothing and did nothing. What a tragedy. The first gap was between Joseph and Moses. For 400 years, God said nothing and did nothing. And it was during that gap that the Indian and the Chinese and the Eastern cultures really developed. The other gap is after Malachi and lasted from Malachi to John the Baptist. And it was during that time that Greek philosophy and Roman organization took over. Men like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle came in that gap. It was during that gap that Buddhism began, during that gap that Confucianism began. Seems when God's not talking and acting, man seizes the opportunity to develop his own cultures and religions. Fascinating, isn't it? Well, now that's the timeline of the Old Testament. And therefore, the scriptures come from prophetic history. There were books written in the second 400-year gap. We call them the Apocrypha. They're very interesting books. There's not a word from God in them. There's not a miracle of God in them. Thus saith the Lord, 3,808 times in prophetic history, not once in the Apocrypha. That's why it's not in our Bible. And it should never be. Catholics put it in because it teaches purgatory and prayers to the saints, and that's where they get it from, so they put it in. Now then, the line, however, that I want to look at next is the apocalyptic view of history. Let me draw some diagrams for you. This is Greek view of history. It is cyclic. It goes round in circles, never gets anywhere. The rhythmic view of history, which many people subscribe to today, is that history doesn't go back on itself ever, but it's a series of up and downs. Inflation and deflation, boom and bust. And it just goes on, and we don't know whether it'll end on an upper or a downer. Then there is the optimistic view of history, that the line does this and goes up. And that's the view that prevailed at the beginning of the 20th century. An English Prime Minister said, up and up and up and on and on and on. And the great word on everybody's lips at the beginning of this century was progress. They really believed this was going to be the happiest and best century of all. At the end of the 20th century, we have an opposite. We have a line going down. And the key word on everybody's lips now is survival. Will we survive the 21st century? And the pundits, the futurologists are telling us no. No way we'll see a third millennium or even a 22nd century. Well, now, the apocalyptic pattern of history is very interesting. It is a downer and a sudden upper and then a straight line. That's the apocalyptic line of history, and it's shared by Jews, Christians, and communists. And they all got it from the same place, from the Hebrew prophets. That is the expectation of the future of the Hebrew prophets, that things will get worse and worse and worse, and suddenly better. They called it the present evil age and the age to come. Now, I say communists share it as well. The difference between Jews, Christians, and communists is what changes the downer into an upper and maintains it. What is the event that marks that sudden up? For the communist, man achieves that through revolution. That the struggle between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie will reach that crisis point, and revolution will inaugurate a crimeless, classless society in which everybody will be happy. Well, the communist dream has crashed now. But Karl Marx, you see, had a Jewish mother and a Lutheran father. He got it from the Bible. But he said man will achieve that upper. The Jew believed that God would intervene, and they looked for God to intervene. The Christian believes that upper is the second coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. But the basic hope for the future is identical to Jew, Christian, and communist. That one day there will be the perfect society. And it will come suddenly and not gradually. And that things will get worse until that crisis comes. Now, it's that apocalyptic view that we're going to explore together this morning. Now, sorry, I put my transparencies on top of my notes. Crazy thing to do. Let's go a little further now. The next thing we need to understand, if this isn't getting too complicated, is what Oscar Kuhlman first introduced in this very book, which has affected almost every theologian since, and that is, he picked up a phrase that Paul uses, the overlap of the ages. And he said that though the Jews expected the present evil age to end when the age to come began, in fact, in the New Testament we have an overlap of the ages. We have, in fact, two ages simultaneously, two kingdoms on earth. The kingdom of Satan and the kingdom of God. And the two now overlap. We are now living in a new era in which both kingdoms are present. You know, it's foolish to say that eschatology, the study of the last things, is a department of theology. I believe the gospel is through and through eschatological. It is the present breaking in, the future breaking into the present. It is the overlap of the ages. The age to come has come, but not fully. It is not yet consummated, but it is inaugurated. You can enter it, but you can't yet inherit it. And those are the two verbs that are used in the New Testament for the present kingdom and the future. You can enter it now, but you can't inherit it until later. And the word inherit is associated with the future of the kingdom, but the word enter is associated with the present. Jesus came preaching the kingdom, and he said you can enter it, but you can't yet inherit it. Now, it is that tension of what has already come and what we can't have yet that we must get right. You see, Christians swing from one to the other. When I study the parables of the kingdom in Jesus, I find that exactly 1/3 describe the kingdom as a present process of growth, like the mustard seed and so on. 1/3 exactly tell you that the kingdom is a future crisis that will come suddenly. So there's a contradiction here, or a tension. The other 1/3 of his parables say it's going to be both. A gradual present process and a sudden future crisis. And I find preachers swing, and the charismatic renewal has been swinging. Many of the house church leaders in this country came out of the Brethren, where the kingdom was almost entirely future. Not something to talk about now. And there's been a strong reaction against that background on the part of the original leaders in the more independent charismatic fellowships into a kingdom that's entirely now. See? And the kingdom now became the main theme. I saw a book entitled Kingdom Now on the bookstore. And that introduced a neglect of the kingdom then. And as I see it at the moment, for the most part, charismatics have swung right away from the kingdom then, from the kingdom that we inherit in the future, from the future sudden crisis. No choruses about the second coming. I've asked fellowships, when did you have last have teaching about heaven or hell or the day of judgment? And there are charismatic fellowships in this country that have had no teaching on this. Now let me say straight away that because of your strong Reformed background, you've probably kept teaching on those things. But the average charismatic fellowship has not. And it's been a swing from the kingdom then to the kingdom now. And it's all now, it's all here. And particularly there is, I'm going to say, a post-millennialism that started with the Restoration and is now running high in Dominion and Reconstruction theology that is all, we're building the kingdom now. And the danger is that you identify the church with the kingdom, which the New Testament never does. And when you make that identification, do you know what pastors become? They become little kings. And evangelism is replaced by imperialism. I'm sorry I'm speaking bluntly, but so many little fellowships in this country say we've now opened up a branch of our work in Africa and Eastern Europe, and they're empire building, they're not evangelizing. If you really evangelize, you don't hang on to the strings of your children. You're not building a gigantic pattern for yourself. I'm sorry I speak strongly, but I just see this happening. When you say it's all kingdom now, we are the kingdom, you start behaving like kings, and you build empires. And that is not our task. Every time the word reign is used in the New Testament, it's used in the future tense. We are not reigning with Christ now. You can reign over sin in your body. That's the only exception, Romans 5. But reigning over the world is not yet. Let me jump ahead a little. I find three moods among Christians. I find optimists, pessimists, and realists, depending on what they think of the kingdom. Someone has said, if you tell me what you mean by the word kingdom, I'll tell you the rest of your theology. And I have found that to be true. The kingdom is the crucial concept. Well, now let me caricature these three moods so that you can recognize them. I admit it's caricature. I'll deal with the pessimists first, mainly older Christians in small fellowships. We're in the last days. There's going to be a great falling away. I don't know how many there'll be to greet our Lord on his return. Maybe only you and me. And I'm not even sure if you're sound. Now, you know what I mean. Those are the pessimists among us. I meet them. But now that's being overtaken by a naive optimism, and I caricature. We're marching for Jesus. We're going to take over the land. We're going to rule the nations now. We're going to drive the devil to France. We're going to clean up England. See? Mainly young people. And there's a naive optimism about that which is going to be terribly disillusioned. Many people left mainline denominations 20 years ago, 15 years ago, because they thought the kingdom was just round the corner and they wanted to be part of it. And the new fellowship said, we are the kingdom, you better be part of us if you're going to be part of it, because it's just about to come. And I'm meeting disillusioned Christians all over this land. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. It's unrealistic. And yet the hopes are being raised that Christians are going to take the world over before Jesus gets back. I think we've got to be very careful what hopes we raise, because hope deferred makes the heart sick. There's a realism. I'd like to think I'm a realist, because I base my philosophy on the parables of Jesus, and particularly the parable of the wheat and the tares. And that says both kingdoms are going to grow. Let both grow together until the time of the harvest. And therefore I expect the kingdom of God in Britain to grow, to get stronger. I expect the kingdom of Satan also to grow and get stronger. And that means increasing confrontation, increasing conflict, until I believe ultimately Christ and Antichrist will face each other. And I have no doubt whatever about the outcome. Therefore, I am preaching around this country, get ready for persecution. That could mean revival, because I've noticed again and again that most revivals in church history prepared God's people for suffering and persecution. It's God's way of getting people ready. Not getting them ready for a great time, but getting them ready for suffering. That's what happened in Uganda and Burundi. And if what we are seeing now is of God, then it's getting us ready for trouble. And for 10 years I've been pleading with leaders, get your people ready for persecution. It has already begun. They laughed 10 years ago. Now nobody laughs. Official persecution of Christians has now begun in this country. Now that's another subject, but I haven't time to go into it. But it has begun. I have it on good authority that a private investigation agency in London has been hired to compile a dossier on the private lives of every known national Christian leader. And it's from that source that the new Bishop of Durham was shot down. And they're getting ready. First way to get ready for persecution is to live a holy life, which is the message of Revelation 1-3. Get things put right in the church before the trouble hits you. Because a church that is compromised, either in belief or behavior, will not stand when the pressure's on. But my visits behind the Iron Curtain when it was still up and behind the bamboo curtain today tell me that persecution is the one thing that would put the church in this country right. It really does. Well, I'm diverting a lot this morning. Let's put now those 3 diagrams all together and try and see the timeline of the whole Bible. Can you move it up, please? And the timeline is an apocalyptic line with an overlap of the ages. But it has 2 peaks, as it were, the peak of David in the Old Testament and the peak of the Son of David in the New. But it's the fact that he's coming twice, first to inaugurate and then to consummate the kingdom, that has thrown the Jewish people. They expected just one coming that would do both. In fact, the hope of the Old Testament is ambiguous in 3 regards. And we need to get these 3 ambiguities clear. The first ambiguity is, was there hope for the future a national or an international hope? And the tension comes out. On the one hand, it was the hope of a restored monarchy to Israel, and a re-establishment of Israel, a vindication of Israel in the eyes of the world. And many were simply nationalistic that Jesus dealt with. That's why the crowd preferred Barabbas. Unusual that Barabbas had the name Jesus Barabbas. You ever notice that? And Barabbas means son of the Father. And Pilate said, which Jesus, son of the Father, do you want? And they said, we want the man who'll fight for us. We want the political agitator. We want the terrorist. And Jesus disappointed the Jews very deeply. Still does. He's also disappointed Gentiles. Gentiles say he's been in the world 2,000 years and it's no better. Christians too have been disappointed with Jesus, if we're honest. It seems such a struggle at times. Are we going to win? But you see, the disappointment is due to the fact that we think he should have done it all on the first visit. Why did he split his ministry into 2 visits? The answer is very simple. If he'd come to destroy sinners the first time, would there have been anything left? Amazing how all of us are prone to say, God, why don't you deal with all the wicked people in the world? And then the rest of us could enjoy it. We don't know what we're asking when we ask God to intervene and stop wickedness. You're asking him to kill you. If God gave me all I deserved, you wouldn't have a speaker this morning. But there wouldn't be an audience either. All right, so I've lost my thread. We have then this combined overlap and peak. So we've got the Old Testament, which peaked with David and ever afterwards went down. And we expect the world to continue going down, but the new age has been inaugurated by the Son of David in his cross and resurrection. And we can now transfer from the present evil age into the age to come. We can become the people of tomorrow, today. We are the people of the future. We are eschatological believers. No, I wouldn't preach that too widely. People wouldn't understand. We are the people of the end. We're the people of the future. We're the recycled people. The people who are being recycled for a recycled universe. Now then, let's begin to look at Christ and time. We've already said that he was involved in creation and the maintenance. There have been some rather unusual attempts to find Jesus in the Old Testament, not all of which convince me. Paul certainly said he was the rock that followed them in the wilderness and from which they got the water, and he called himself the bread from heaven, a reference to the manna. Some have said, was he the captain of the Lord's host that met Joshua outside Jericho? I love that little incident. Jericho says, whose side are you on? Theirs or ours? No. You're on our side. A lovely little incident. But was that the second person of the Trinity? I think not. Personally, I believe it was an archangel. Was it Jesus in the fiery furnace with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? One like a son of God? I don't know. I think we can force Jesus into the page of the Old Testament. We don't need to. He is everywhere anyway. But let's come to his first invasion of history. That split history into two groups, or two sections. It really was a surprise to me when I lived in Arabia and found that they didn't talk about 1990. And their year was a different day. We tend to assume that everybody thinks Anno Domini. But it's only the Christian influence on civilization in the West that has made this 1995 Anno Domini. What do we mean by that? Just before Christ or after Christ? The Jews, of course, talk about BCE, before the Christian era, rather than BC, when they use our date. But they have their own date, which they've worked out from 4004. In fact, the Jewish calendar is not entering the 21st century in a few years' time. It's about 5,760 something. And so 2000 is not on God's calendar. It's on ours, but it's not on his, even if he's on the Jewish calendar. But it's just a milestone. Well, now, what we mean by Anno Domini is that the world is now governed by a human being. It's not just after Christ. Anno Domini is the period of his rule. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to him. That is a change from BC. In BC, God was ruling history. In AD, Jesus, his son, is ruling history and has earned that right by becoming obedient unto death, wherefore God has highly exalted him. And there's a human being in the control room of the universe now. That is new, quite new. A man is controlling history, and his name is Jesus. When I went to Romania, I said, I understand Romania still has a king. And I understand he's a Jew. When I went to Australia, I said, you can never be a republic. I know you've got plans to, but you never can be. You've got a king, and he's Jewish. It's been my message around the world. There can't be a true republic now because every republic is under King Jesus. There's a monarchy over the whole world now. You see, the real message of the gospel is there is another king. And the reason why the early Christians were persecuted was that it was regarded as treason. They preached there is another king. Listen, I'm preaching the King of England. He is already King of England, though people don't realize it. We're already under the throne of Jesus. He's reigning now. When he told the parable of the wheat and the tares, he said, the field is the world, and the world is my kingdom. The world is already the kingdom of Christ, if it's not yet the kingdom of God. It's the kingdom of Christ. And of course, since Christ is God, then it is the kingdom of God. But it is not yet manifested. And there's still an amazing liberty given to the other kingdom of Satan. The ascension is a very important part of Christian doctrine, but it's not often preached. because that is the time when Jesus took his throne. Not just his priesthood, but his throne. And he is reigning now. He's on the throne of the universe now. But we haven't seen anything yet. Well, now, I'm talking this morning about Christ, though I'm going to talk about the future. Now, I just want to say a little. I agree wholeheartedly with the emphasis of the book you just mentioned, that Christ is central to the future, and you can be so busy working out schedules and almanacs that you forget Christ. He is the end. My problem with that book and with a number of books is that that's not the whole story. He is the Lord of history, and he must wind up history his way. And that's very important, to have a clear picture of how he is going to wind up history. And that's where the divisions come in among Christians. I'm going to be quite unembarrassed and unashamed to give you the conclusion that I've been led to after many, many years. And if you saw the books on this on my shelf, you'd realize I've studied every position as much as I possibly can. I always buy books I disagree with and study them thoroughly. I want to be exposed to every viewpoint as much as I can. But then I don't want to be left in such confusion that I don't have confidence to preach. And what I find today is the situation that there is such confusion among Christians about how Jesus will wind up history that they're not preaching it. And by neglect, by default, we are losing a ground of hope. Now let me say, when I mention the word hope, I am not now going to talk, I will before the end, I'm not now talking about the hope for the next world. On that most Christians are agreed. The disagreement is, what hope is there for this world? That's where the difference lies. And this is why I believe we've been left with a gospel that doesn't really click with the people of this world, because it doesn't offer hope for this world. And in the world's eyes, we become like lifeboat sailors off the Titanic. And we're just trying to get a few more individuals into the lifeboat for another world. While the Titanic goes down, we don't have any hope for this one. Now, it is that is my great burden, because I believe that the way Jesus winds up history gives hope for this world as well as the next. Now, if I just spoke about our hopes for the next world, we'd probably be all agreed, with this exception, that those who have no hope for this earth rarely preach about the new earth. Have you ever noticed that? That somehow hope for the old earth and the new earth belong together. And if you don't have any hope for this world, you only preach about heaven, which the Bible doesn't do. The phrase "go to heaven" doesn't occur in my New Testament. Isn't that interesting? Yet how often you go to heaven to be with Jesus when you die? Even unbelievers tell their kids that Granny's gone to heaven to be with Jesus. It's their way of getting over the problem and explaining to a child. But the world think that's what we're preaching. Well, heaven is only a waiting room. It's not a permanent destination. Well, I'll come back to that later. Our permanent destination is the new earth. The Bible is an earth-centered book, not a heaven-centered book. And when we, again, the Greek philosophy has separated heaven and earth, and we talk about heaven, which the Bible doesn't, the description at the end of the Bible is about the new earth and a new Jerusalem that's come down out of heaven, and a God who's come down out of heaven to live with us here. The earth is the center of everything for God in my Bible, and it begins and ends. Mentions the old heaven and the old earth in the first verse of Genesis, and the rest of Genesis is all about the earth. It mentions a new heaven in the first verse of chapter 21 of Revelation, and the rest of it is all about the new earth. But we become super spiritual, we are heaven-oriented instead of earth-oriented, and the result is we don't preach about the new earth, and we don't offer any hope for the old earth. And so we're just saving people off the Titanic. I'm sorry, I'm caricaturing again, but I want to make the point very clearly and strongly. But I believe that Jesus is the center of the future. He is central to the book of Revelation. It is the revelation of Jesus, which could mean the revelation from Jesus or the revelation about Jesus. I believe it's both. And he is absolutely central. But it's a different Jesus to the Jesus of the Gospels. And those who don't master the book of Revelation will have an unbalanced view of Jesus Christ. He is very different here. His appearance is so different that John swoons at the sight of him. He never saw him with white hair. He didn't see those blazing eyes. He didn't see that sharp two-edged sword coming out of his mouth. You know, the Roman soldier had two swords. One was a long, thin one, a fencing sword for one-to-one battle. But the other was what, as an ex-farmer, I can only describe as a hay knife. Do you know those broad hay knives, very heavy with a double handle that you cut down through the hay? Very broad blade with a ridge down the middle. Very heavy, double-handed, with a sharp double edge. And with one of those, one Roman soldier could keep 50 people away from him. He swung it from side to side, and if you got within reach of it, it would slice your arm or leg off just like that. So heavy and sharp. And that sharp two-edged sword is exactly the shape of the human tongue. And God's word is a sharp two-edged sword. It can slay 50. And it's a vivid picture. When John saw this Jesus, remember he'd leaned against his bosom at meal after meal and whispered in his ear. And when he sees this Jesus, he falls in a swoon. By the way, I want to correct something Campbell McAlpine said, which you rightly didn't understand because he didn't give you the context. What we were really discussing was not falling down, but this dreadful phrase, being slain in the Spirit. And I said it's biblical. Ananias and Sapphira had the experience. And if you want it, all you need to do is to lie about how much you put in the offering and be sure to have Simon Peter as your pastor. And you too can be slain in the Spirit. That's what I said, actually. I've nothing against falling down. But I do notice that it is always in Scripture a human reaction to a divine presence. It is not a divine action. God doesn't push people down. But it is an understandable human reaction to a sudden encounter with God. And in that sense, it is biblical. The interesting thing is, the only thing God does on occasions like that is to lift people to their feet again, without them trying to get up. So I believe in levitation by the Spirit. Ezekiel kept falling down, and God said, "Get up again, I haven't finished dealing with you." And since Ezekiel didn't get up, he says the Spirit lifted him to his feet. Let's get a sense of proportion in these things. Natural human reactions are one thing, but theological terms that define human reactions as divine actions are mistaken. And phrases like slain in the Spirit or the Anglican version resting in the Spirit are not biblical. They're suggesting that the Spirit did it. And the danger of that suggestion is that you think the work has been done if someone hits the deck. And I've discovered it hasn't in many cases. And I've also discovered that a demon-possessed person will flake out to evade further ministry. And so we need discernment in all this. Let's keep a balanced view and a biblical view. That's an aside again. But his appearance was overwhelming to John. And we need to realize and to preach that in the book of Revelation, the apocalyptic Lord is a mass killer. Pacifists cannot cope with this. But when he comes, he slays an army with that two-edged sword and leaves a field so full of corpses that nobody can bury them, and the angels have to invite the vultures to clean up the mess. This is a different Jesus from the gentle Jesus, meek and mild, we teach in Sunday school. This is an apocalyptic Lord whose main characteristic when he comes again will be wrath, not compassion. And if you only preach the Jesus of the Gospels, and if the Jesus of the Gospels is the only Jesus taught in schools, and the Jesus of the apocalyptic is not taught, you will have an unbalanced view of Jesus. Here is a Jesus whom people would rather be swallowed up under a mountain falling in an earthquake than look into his eyes. Hide us from the wrath of the Lamb. Now this is a different Jesus. No, it isn't. It's the same Jesus, because you can still see the nail prints. The Lamb as if it had been slain. But you know, the word lamb is totally misleading. I wish I could retranslate that part of the Bible. Lamb is a nice little white cuddly thing. And that's how he's pictured in stained glass windows. The word should be ram. This is a 1-year-old with 7 horns. a mature male sheep. You would not like to be left in a room with a 7-horned 1-year-old ram. I tell you, I've been a shepherd, and they can be jolly difficult. They can be scary. A full-grown ram. See, people say Jesus combines this beautiful little cuddly lamb and the Lion of Judah. No, he combines the ram with 7 horns and the lion. They're both very strong pictures. Let's get an apocalyptic view of Jesus, the strong King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And the main function of a king in the Middle East, we don't understand what a king does. I mean, he wasn't a constitutional monarch and never will be. Our queen doesn't rule. She reigns, but she doesn't rule. Not quite sure who rules at the moment. But ruling and reigning have been separated in a constitutional monarchy. 24 crowned heads of Europe have fallen since 1900, and most have become republics. And as Mitterrand said about England, England is a republic disguised as a monarchy, and France is a monarchy disguised as a republic. That is a profound political remark. But we don't know what a king is for. The king is the ultimate court of justice in the Middle East, in the Bible. And therefore, he must vindicate the innocent and bring vengeance on the guilty. He must vindicate the righteous and bring vengeance on the wicked. He must. That's the job of a king. And in the book of Revelation, Jesus fulfills the job of a king. He did not fulfill that job on his first visit, but he will on his second. And frankly, it is a terrifying prospect if we are not right with God. Perhaps people shy away from the book of Revelation, not because of its symbolism, which is not all that obscure, but because they don't want that Jesus. They want the gentle Jesus, meek and mild, but he's both. He is strong. Behold the man. In the book of Revelation, he releases terrible disasters on the world, which result in the deaths of millions. That's Jesus. That's the slain lamb. In this book, he causes the deaths of millions quite directly. He is a killer. In this book, above all, it is he who consigns people to everlasting torment. Now, that's a side of Jesus you don't hear much about, especially on broadcast religion. You never hear about that for the simple reason that people would switch off. They have the control of the preacher, radio and TV. But this is Jesus. He will come again to judge. We need to preach the whole Jesus. Now, let's look at his work in the rest of the time we've got, quickly. And I'm just going to introduce you to what I'm saying in detail in the book of Revelation, in the book When Jesus Returns. The first section is identical with the booklet explaining the second coming. That's what I preach. But the other 3 sections are from my study, not from my pulpit. And the second section is a whole approach to the book of Revelation, which I hope is fresh, but not novel, but will at least enable preachers to preach it with confidence. The third section is about the dispensational teaching on the rapture. I believe in the rapture. Every Christian believes in the rapture. The difference is when it occurs. Does it occur secretly, before the big trouble, or publicly afterwards? And I'm honest about my own position there. I believe in one coming, not 2. And I find no ground in Scripture for the escapist doctrine of a secret rapture. I cannot find it. I've searched and searched. I don't believe it's there. And the fact that it was only discovered in the Bible in 1830, where were all the other Bible scholars for all those centuries? And I believe a false prophecy had quite a bit to do with its so-called discovery. And I feel it's the most dangerous false prophecy around the second coming that is affecting people today. If I'm wrong, I'd say I'd rather be wrong my way than the other. I'd rather tell people to get ready for persecution and find the escape than tell them they're going to escape and then them not be ready. It did immense damage to Chinese Christians, the dispensational teaching of a secret rapture. When the big trouble came to China, they were not ready. They said, what's happening? Our missionaries promised we'd be taken up before this happened. See, it's a very dangerous false prophecy. And I believe that was its source. And I've traced the way it got into Christian thinking in the book. Then in the final section, I deal with the millennium. And there, to some people's surprise, I am a premillennialist. The tragedy is that the dispensational teaching and premillennialism have become so identified in the last 150 years that I believe people have thrown away the baby with the bathwater again and again. I believe the Bible clearly teaches a millennial reign of Christ on this earth. But I can't find a trace of any secret rapture in it. So that puts me in a funny position. I upset both the dispensationalists and the A and Post and all the others, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. But I want to ask you to consider your position carefully. The one thing we must not be is pan-millennial. Yes, that's what most people are today. You know what that means. Everything will pan out all right in the end. We'll just wait and see. And the result is there is no preaching on it. You see, if you're not clear of your understanding, you won't preach it. And by default, the future disappears from your preaching. And that is a tragedy, because we are saved in hope, as Paul says. And the readings we had were about the God of hope. And hope is as essential to the Christian life and faith and love. But we're getting so many preachers and books on faith and love, and so little on hope. Well, what hope is there for this world? That's the real crucial question. And there is such a huge variety of answers among Christians that the world hasn't a clue at all. Now, very quickly, let me show you a few charts on the book of Revelation, and then we'll look particularly at its teaching about how Jesus will wind up history. Now, I'm sure you're aware of the four schools of interpretation: the preterist, the historicist, the futurist, and the idealist. Just let me remind you of how those four views actually handle the book of Revelation. Because if you only read one commentary or commentaries from one school, I think you're going to miss the truth of Revelation. If you've only read Hendrickson's More Than Conquerors, then you are bound into one view, which will blind you, I believe, to most truths, or many truths in the book. The preterist says that the whole book is about the first few centuries AD. It's about the fall of the Roman Empire, persecution under Nero. It's easy enough to say Babylon is Rome when it says it's built on 7 hills, until you read the next verse, which says the 7 hills are 7 kings, and then you're in trouble again. But this is the preterist view, and most liberal scholars interpret the book of Revelation as about the first century. It is therefore an historical book and is a primary reference to their situation, and the only things we can learn from it are learning from history. They usually make an exception of the last 2 chapters, but apart from that, it's all about the first few centuries. The historicist says that the book of Revelation actually unfolds the entire church history from the first to the second coming, and there are 2 versions of this. One is called linear, which means that it unfolds the whole history of the church age once, and it usually puts us in about chapter 16 or 17. I read one book that actually annotated the book of Revelation with the Cambridge Ancient and Modern History volumes and told you which volume fitted which chapter. The trouble is that I've never yet read 2 historicists who agree on what refers to what. And frankly, that makes me worried as to whether they've really got onto it. But there is a cyclical view of the historicist, which is Hendrickson's, which is that it covers the church age again and again and again and again, and keeps going back to the beginning 7 times. And again, I find it quite unconvincing. But it talks about recapitulation all the time, that you keep going back on your tracks. Then there is the futurist, which puts most of Revelation from 6 to onwards into the last century AD, and says these things are all future, they haven't happened yet, but they will. And then the idealist, which is the easiest one, because it gets you out of all the problems, that it doesn't apply to any particular events in history, that it's just a mythological picture of the struggle between good and evil, which happens in every age, any time. So that's all centuries AD. Now, I hope that isn't too complicated, but there are the 4 basic views. And I think it's a mistake to try and choose one as the key to the whole book. And I've found that, in fact, each has an element of truth which needs to be used. But that we need, and this is my own selection, if you like, I find that chapters 1 to 3 are preterist. They are 7 churches of Asia in the 1st century. That's certainly the place to begin with the 7 letters. I'm not impressed by the historicist, which says that the 7 churches represent 7 ages in time of the church, and we are Laodicean. Well, we certainly are in Britain, but you go to the third world, they're not Laodicean. So the idea that we've got 7 ages just doesn't click with me at all. The third, the futurist, believes that before Jesus returns, those 7 churches will be rebuilt and reestablished in those 7 cities. I find that quite unconvincing. The idealist, however, I do believe has a clue here, and that is that those 7 churches may not represent 7 ages in time, but they do represent 7 types of church in space. And that we can learn from them and see a mirror to where our church is, and that they, between them, represent the Church of Jesus Christ in all its variations. So I use the preterist and a bit of the idealist for the first 3 chapters. When we move into the middle section, the preterist I find quite unconvincing because almost everything it predicts didn't happen in the decline of the Roman Empire. It just didn't happen. A third of mankind didn't die of disease, and hailstones a hundredweight didn't fall. And detail after detail just didn't happen in the decline of the Roman Empire. So I find the historicist the preterist out. The historicist, I just cannot find 2 commentators who agree on which chapter we're living in, and which refers to the Reformation, and which refers to this, that, and the other. And if they don't agree, I think, frankly, they haven't got onto it. So the historicist I find the weakest. The futurist, yes, I can see that these things haven't happened yet and that they will happen. But I also see the idealist has a point, because future events cast their shadows before them. There will be an antichrist, but as John says, there are many antichrists already. There will be the false prophet, but there are already many false prophets. So that in a sense we can see the final events even today. And the final events help us to see what's building up. I don't think Saddam Hussein is the Antichrist, or Gaddafi, or Kissinger. But I believe some of these men are antichrists. Do you see what I mean? They are foreshadowings. I don't believe that 666 is on the checkout groceries at the store, but I do see in that, and the fact that Swindon will be the first town in this country to do away with money and use only numbers in shopping as an experiment. I see a foretaste, a foreshadowing. So I use idealist as well in the middle chapters, but mainly futurist. When I come to the final chapters, 2022, the futurist is clearly the key to it. The new heaven and the new earth haven't come. They are yet to come. And that's the only one I can see there. So what I'm saying is, be flexible. Use the right key to unlock the right part. Don't get stuck in one particular thing. Now let's look at the whole of Revelation very quickly. It is... What have I said? The outline of Revelation is an apocalyptic outline. Now here let me just say a little thing. I know it will be different from what many of you believe, but I just ask you again, search your scriptures. Don't believe it because I say it. And if you can't find it yourself in the Bible, forget it. But I believe the purpose of Revelation is the important key. Why was it written? It was not written to satisfy our curiosity about the future. And if that's how we treat it, we're mistreating it. It's almost impossible to fit it all into a diagram. If you've tried, you'll find out why. That tells me, because Jesus was a good teacher, if he really was just giving it to us as an almanac that would tell us exactly where we are, he would have done a better job than that. The emphasis is not on what is going to happen, but that we must be ready for what is going to happen. It was written to get us ready. And the key to me is that it was written on the Lord's Day. Now you think that's Sunday, don't you? But Sunday was never called the Lord's Day in the New Testament. It was called the first day of the week. What is the significance of that phrase? Well, let's go back to Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was the first Roman emperor to call himself God. Augustus followed, and Augustus was the first Roman emperor to demand that temples be built in which he could be worshipped. And they were built everywhere, particularly in Asia Minor. Nero was the first emperor to persecute Christians. He used to cover them with tar and set them on fire, alive in his back garden when he had a barbecue to provide illumination. I stood in that very garden, tried to imagine Christians burning alive just to light up his garden party. And he would tie them into the skins of wild animals and set dogs on them. But that was very localized persecution. It didn't affect people in Asia. The man who really began empire-wide persecution was a man called Domitian at the end of the first century, around 96. And he demanded that everybody, once a year, worshipped him and stood in front of an altar fire and a statue or bust of Caesar, Domitian, and they had to throw a pinch of incense on the fire and then say 3 words, Caesar is Lord. Raise their hand like that, actually. Caesar is Lord. And the Christians refused. That's when it really began. Now, the annual day on which he commanded that to be done was the Lord's Day. That was his title for it. He called himself King and Lord. And that is the phrase in Revelation quite clearly, because if it was simply a Sunday, John would have said, I was in the Spirit on a Lord's Day. But furthermore, the word Lord is not a noun, it's an adjective. It is literally translated the Lordly Day, or the Lordy Day. And that is exactly the title that Domitian gave to it. And here is John in prison for the testimony of Jesus and the Word of God. And on the Lord's Day, he sees that this is the greatest crisis those churches that he ministers to has faced. They've got a choice between denying Christ and living, or refusing and dying. That's why it's full of martyrs from beginning to end. It's a manual for martyrdom before it happens. There is one of the 7 churches that has already had 1 martyr, but John sees there are going to be many, many, many more, a multitude that no man can count. And he's preparing them for that. And if you ask me, and here comes the controversial bit, but if you ask me what is the purpose of Revelation, I would say it is to keep believers' names in the book of life. He who overcomes, I will not blot out his name from the book of life. Now, the whole book is addressed to believers, and every warning is addressed to believers. And right at the end of the book, after describing the wonders of the new heaven and the new earth, these words come: he who overcomes will inherit all this, but the cowardly and the faithless and the immoral will be thrown into the lake of fire. Now, this is addressed to Christians, and the very conjunction of those 2 sentences means that he's talking about cowardly Christians and faithless Christians and immoral Christians. And the urgency of the situation is keep your name in the book of life, so that when on the day it's opened, you will be there. Now, that I believe is clearly, you read it through, you will find it very clearly there. It is an appeal to believers to be overcomers in the pressures that are coming. And the appeal is both positive and negative. Positive, rewards for overcomers. I'll give you a new name. You'll sit with me on my throne. You'll be a pillar in the church of my God. And all these rewards are offered. But the warnings are also there. You deny me before men, I deny you before my Father. If we endure, if we're faithful, if we don't deny him, but the consequences of going under in persecution are enormous. And it is out of that situation that John is given this vision and voices urgently to prepare Christians for persecution. And I believe this book is beginning to come into its own. It is read everywhere in China because you have to read it through tears. You have to be persecuted to understand the message. And that may be why we argue about it so much in the Western world, because we're not under such pressure. It's a manual for martyrdom. Well, now, let's move right on. Every part of the book is related to this question of preparing people to be overcomers and keep their names in the book of life. The first section is this: get your church right now before the pressure comes. It is urgent. If there's immorality in the church, deal with it now. If there's idolatry in the church, deal with it now. Repent. Get it right now. Of the 7 churches, of course, there are 2 that he has nothing bad to say about and 2 that he has nothing good to say about. And the 2 that he has nothing good to say about are the most successful. Isn't that interesting? Most important thing about your church is, what does Jesus think about it? And you'll find your church somewhere in that first section if you read it with an open mind. And there are 7 letters, each with 7 features in the letter. I can't go into it all now, but it's all built on 7s, the whole book. Perfect number. Till you come to the imperfect number 666. But the book is all about 777. The perfections of God. Now, the book clearly divides into present and future. Christ's word to the present in chapters 1 to 3 is things must be put right now, or you'll never stand when the trouble comes. But then in chapter 4, verse 1, come up here into heaven and let me show you the things that must take place after this. So clearly we come into the future. And that second section, 4 to 22, divides very clearly along apocalyptic lines. Things will get much worse before they get better, and will get much better after they get worse. Could anything more be simpler? And you can see that both are preparing Christians for the future. Things will get worse before they get better, but they will get better after they get worse. The honesty of Jesus, one of the reasons I love him. He never kidded us, never fooled us. If it were not so, I would have told you. He said things will get worse. The comfort I draw from chapters 4 to 18 is this: nothing worse will ever happen to me than what Jesus told me about here. That's a comfort, isn't it? I'm quite serious. To know the worst is better than not to know. When my wife and I visited the doctor in charge of my daughter, he said, tell us the worst, please. We want to know. You can cope with that better than guessing. And we began our adjustment and our grief almost immediately. But we could adjust to what we knew. It's when they don't tell you. Isn't it awful? Jesus said, let not your heart be troubled. I have told you these things before they happen. Oh, thank you, Jesus. There's nothing worse going to happen to us than what he's told us. Isn't that good? And that's the meaning of the middle section. It's not work out the timetable from this, but I'm going to tell you the worst that will happen so that you're ready. But you know, there's an emphasis on time right through the book of Revelation. And the emphasis is constantly on time, times, and half a time. On 42 months, on 1,260 days. What is he saying? It's only for a brief time. The worst will be very quick. Unless those days had been shortened, even the elect couldn't survive. Isn't that beautiful? And though it's a long section of Revelation, it's going to be a very short section of time. And this momentary light affliction works an exceeding weight of glory. Get things in proportion. It's very quick. It'll be tough, it'll be hard, but it'll be quick. Now, of course, the secret rapture boys tell us that Christians won't be on earth for any of this. Then why on earth would Jesus tell us about it? I cannot understand a Jesus who would go into such details of the world's suffering if we didn't need to get ready for it. Why do we need to know about it? It even tempts you to gloat that you won't be there. No, I believe he's preparing his church for the worst that can happen. And then beyond, suddenly it's as if the dark clouds roll away and the sun shines through. And everything gets put right. You know, as things get terrible, there are 4 bad characters introduced. There's the unholy trinity of Satan, chapter 12, and the Antichrist, the false prophet, or the beast and the false prophet. That's a kind of devilish substitute for the Holy Trinity, isn't it? Instead of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, you've got devil, Antichrist, and false prophet. They will take over. And then Babylon is introduced as the financial prostitute that seduces the world. It has nothing to do with the Pope, I believe. And I think if that hadn't been taught, Northern Ireland would be a different place. I really believe the Protestant reformers got it absolutely wrong. They said Rome is the Scarlet Woman. And the Catholic Church responded by saying the Protestants were. So depending which side you were, you believed the other was the Scarlet Woman. I believe that has done terrible damage to the Church of Christ. No, Babylon isn't a religious city at all. It's a commercial city. It's a city where there's money and pleasure without morality. Come out of it, my people. And then those four enemies of the Lord, devil, Antichrist, false prophet, and Babylon, are all dealt with by Christ in reverse order. Babylon falls, Antichrist and false prophet are thrown into hell, later the devil is. There's a beautiful symmetry here. And God will deal with them, Christ will deal with them. And the good news begins. And then we get into the New Jerusalem and the glories of a new heaven and a new earth. It's beautiful. And I believe at least one meaning of the phrase 1,000 years is the bad bit is 3.5 years, the good bit is 1,000 years. Do you see the contrast? Why throw that away for this? Just because it's going to be brief and tough, you're throwing away that. He who overcomes will inherit all that. But the cowardly, the faithless, the immoral won't. See, what an appeal there is here. Now, what is it changes the things getting worse to things getting better? Chapter 19, the second coming. That's the crucial thing. Jesus coming not on a donkey of peace, but on a horse of war, with blood-stained robe, but not his own blood, with a sword in his mouth, King of kings, Lord of lords, coming to trample out the grapes of wrath. Hallelujah. It's going to be put right. Well, changes the whole picture. Now, how kind of Jesus to warn believers. It's going to be tough. But don't worry, compared with what's coming, it's nothing. Don't throw away the future because of the present. Be overcomers. Win through. And really, Revelation is a call to Christians to go the way of Christ. He went this way and he won. You know, there's a story going around American pulpits. I'm sure it's apocryphal. You know, Daddy, was that story true, or was you just preaching? It was one of those, I think. But anyway, it's the story of some theological students who had lectures on the book of Revelation and other apocalyptic literature and were left in total confusion. So they decided to go have a game of basketball in the gymnasium on the campus. And they're playing basketball, and they noticed that the black janitor was sitting at the edge of the court, and they noticed he was reading his Bible. So at the end of the game, they went over to him and said, "Good to see you reading your Bible. What part are you reading?" "Revelation." "You don't understand that, do you?" "Of course." "Oh? So what's the message?" "Oh, simply said Jesus wins." And there is a sense in which, as I've quoted in my book, it is scholars who've confused Revelation. Scholars who are not being persecuted. If you read it with an open, simple mind, I think it's one of the easiest books to understand. I really do. The symbolism is not obscure. Some of it is so obvious you can't make any mistake. Some of it is explained. Some of it is paralleled in the Old Testament. In my understanding, there are less than half a dozen symbols I haven't yet understood. One is the white stone. But most of them are as clear as daylight, if you know your Bible. But people dismiss it. Oh, it's a symbolic book, so you can't trust it. You can't build any doctrine on it. How utterly foolish. Remember that this book was not written for theological students or professors. It was written for ordinary Christians, uneducated Christians who were suffering persecution, and they understand it. And they say, we're going to be overcomers. We'll put up with this present pressure for the sake of the future. As Jesus, who for the joy set before him, endured the cross, despised the shame. That's the message of it. And I believe we need to start teaching our people the message of it now, because persecution is coming here. And we need to concentrate now on the first 3 chapters of getting the church right. I've hardly been to a church in the last 2 or 3 years where there isn't adultery going on of one sort or another. Just come back from Denmark. There was immorality among the leaders in every Baptist church I went to. And I said to the pastors, what are you doing about it? "Oh, well, you can't be too hard today." Boy, how much we need prophetic as well as pastoral gifts in the church. If you just have pastoral, such things are overlooked. And when persecution comes, that church will be shot down. They won't stand. They won't overcome. To put it simply, if we can't overcome the trends inside the church, how are we going to overcome the pressures outside? If you can't fight wrong things inside, how can you fight things outside and face them. You're compromised. And in Britain we have a compromised church. Let's come at last to the millennium. I wanted you to get what you might agree with first. The first thing to say, oh, it's 11:15. Come on. No, that clock's now fast. Good. Well, the first thing I want to say is that I've never yet met a true amillennial. There is such confusion over these titles, A, pre, and post. A friend of mine was asked when he landed in Belfast once, are you amillennial, premillennial, or postmillennial? He said, that is a preposterous question. But you can't get round it that way. But those are not the three choices. And I have given in my book a much more careful, I hope, choice to show what the real choice is. There are, in fact, 6 positions today that I come across. The word amillennial actually means non-millennial. But I haven't met any non-millennials among evangelicals. I meet them among liberal scholars, and they divide into 2 groups, 2 subgroups. There are the skeptical amillennials who just dismiss Revelation 20 as having no value or meaning at all. And one scholar put it like this: it's the result of indigestion at the best or insanity at the worst. And many would take that attitude even if they don't say it. Mythical or mythological amillennialism says it does have meaning, but it doesn't apply to any particular period of time. The 1,000 years is irrelevant as a phrase. They would say it's as irrelevant as the 6 days of Genesis 1. It's part of the poetic framework of the myth, but not part of the message. You with me? That it's a myth that has a truth in it. It's not about a historical event at all, but it is a story with a truth in it. It's a fable. And of course, most of Jesus' parables were myths in the technical sense. You realize that? That's a story, a fictional story with a truth embedded in it. I believe the parables were truly myths. There may have been prodigal sons, but I think Jesus made up the story to communicate a truth. But to dismiss all the Bible as myth, which is being done now, so that you demythologize even the resurrection, you're in dead trouble. Well, now, those are amillennials. And basically, they are united on the ground that the 1,000 years does not refer to any particular period of time. The postmillennial position says that the 1,000 years refers to the church age. And that's what most people who tell me they are amillennials actually believe. They believe in Revelation 20, but they say it applies before the coming of Christ, and that therefore his coming is post-millennium, and that the millennium is actually an interpretation of the church age today. Hendrickson takes that view. He's not an amillennial. He's what I call a spiritual post-millennial, because if you apply Revelation 20 to the church age, you have to do it in a spiritual way. You can't do it in a political way. You follow me? And you apply it to the whole church age, and therefore now we have to say, though Augustine thought it would refer literally to 1,000 years, you would now have to say it refers to at least 2,000, so it's a round number. But it refers to the church age from the first advent to the second. That is spiritual post-millennialism, and that is what most people I talk to who call themselves amillennial actually are. They would apply Revelation 20 to the church age in a spiritual way, that it's a spiritual reign of Christ and the saints, either the spiritual reign of the saints in glory with Christ, or the spiritual authority of the saints on earth in the name of Christ. But it is a reign of Christ and Christians through the church now. That's post-millennial. But later, that became, Augustine was the first post-millennialist, but he was a spiritual post-millennialist, and so were the reformers. Later, there came a political version that said the millennium, the 1,000 years, refers to the last section of the church age, in which the church will have Christianized the world, and the majority of people will be Christian, and the Christians will actually have taken power and rule the nations before Christ gets back. That has come up very strongly with Reconstructionism, Rushdoony's work, and Chilton's, and the whole Dominion theology movement. But it began with the Restorationism of 20 years ago, when people really believed we were going to bring the kingdom in. Restoration magazine was political postmillennialism. In its editorial little note just inside the cover every month, it said, "We believe the church will establish the kingdom on earth." See? Now that's political postmillennialism. And I want you to distinguish, you see, not between amillennialism and postmillennialism. What we tend to call postmillennialism is in fact to be political postmillennialism. And what amillennialism is actually spiritual postmillennialism. What Augustine did, and he was the first to do it, and since so many follow him, it has affected the entire church. He shifted Revelation 20 from after the coming of Christ to before. That's all. But he interpreted it then spiritually rather than politically. I have to add that I believe it was part of his fear of the physical that did it. Unfortunately, some premillennial preachers in the early church, and up to Augustine, the early church was almost universally premillennial. Clement and Origen, again, were not, but they were the first Greek philosophizers. But the evidence is that there was only one view in the early church of the early centuries, and that was premillennialism, what Papias called the corporeal reign of Christ on earth after his return. But Augustine said, no, Revelation 20 is the church age. It is a recapitulation in the book. It was the cyclical recapitulation that shifted 20 to before 19, virtually, and said it was a picture of the church. Then comes the premillennial, and again we must distinguish between the dispensational premillennialism of the brethren that got into the Schofield Bible and Dallas Seminary and Hal Lindsey's books, which is a very different view from the premillennialism of the early church, very different. It essentially separated Israel and the church forever, and saw Israel as God's earthly people and the church as God's heavenly people. And if you were brought up in the brethren, that's what you were taught. Not all brethren believed it. George Muller didn't. He didn't believe in a secret rapture or this division between the church and Israel. But I'm afraid J.N. Darby's views prevailed, and it became Orthodox Brethren teaching. And J.N. Darby gave it to a lawyer called C.I. Schofield in America. He put the notes in his Bible. Never buy a Bible with notes, because you have to have tremendous mental discipline to say this is human notes and not the Word of God. People who buy the Schofield Bible said it's in the Bible. The secret rapture's in my Bible. Well, it wasn't. It was in the notes on 1 Thessalonians 4, but the secret rapture is not in 1 Thessalonians 4. It's in the notes underneath it. And people bought that Bible and said, hey, I found it in the Bible. Never buy a Bible with notes in it. Buy plenty of commentaries. Don't buy a Bible with notes. It's the most dangerous thing you can do. Because, you're reading down the page, and you're reading this line, it's God's Word, and you're reading the next line, it's man's Word. And to remember that, it's just impossible for the human mind to keep saying, no, I must take that with a pinch of salt. I must examine that. That's not inspired. But that line is. You see what I mean? And the Schofield Bible probably did more damage than anything else. Classical premillennialism sees the millennium as Christian, whereas dispensational sees it as essentially a revival of Judaism, even a revival of Jewish sacrifice in a rebuilt temple. And Hebrews makes it very difficult to cope with that. So these are the 6 views. Do you want to know which view you are? Just work through the questionnaire. The phrase 1,000 years occurs 6 times in Revelation 20. Will there be such a period in history? Does it refer to a period? If you say no, you're an amillennial. You then ask, well, does it have any meaning? If you say no, you're a skeptical amillennial. If you say yes, you're a mythological one. But if, however, you say yes, the 1,000 years does refer to a period in history, then you have to ask the question, will it be before or after Christ's return? If you say it will be before, you are a post-millennial, whether you like it or not. And then you have to ask, does this period cover the whole of church history or just the last triumphal period in it? And if it covers the whole, you are a spiritual post-millennial. If you believe it's going to be the last age when the church overcomes the world in the name of Jesus and rules the nations now, then you are a political post-millennialist. If, however, you say the 1,000 years comes after Christ's return, then you are a premillennial. And you then need to ask, do I think primarily that will be a restored Jewish kingdom or a Christian kingdom in which Jew and Gentile who believe in Jesus will together reign with him. And if you say Jewish, you're dispensational. If you're Christian, you're classical. And classical is called that because it was the united and unargued view. The most striking thing about the first 4 centuries is that nobody ever presented another viewpoint than classical premillennialism. So let's ask then quickly, 5 minutes, what is the ground for a premillennial view? And the first thing that I want to say is this. If you're really going to study Revelation, take a pen and cross out the figure 20 and the figure 21 at the end of Revelation. You can cross them all out if you like, but the chapter headings are not inspired by God, and they have put asunder what God joins. And so often they come in the worst place of all. And nowhere is the Word of God more damaged by chapter divisions than the book of Revelation. And we lose our thread because it's divided into chapters. And we've been talking about Revelation 20. God never intended us to talk like that. When you cut out chapter 20 and chapter 21 and read it through, you suddenly see that in fact there is a series of 7 visions at the end of Revelation. Everything's in 7s. And interestingly enough, if you look at the 7 trumpets, seals, and bowls, you'll find it's always 4, 2, and 1. There are 4 that relate, then 2 different, and then 1 that's quite different from the others. The 4 horsemen of the Apocalypse in the seals. 4, 2, 1, but making up a 7. And the key phrase at the end of Revelation is, and I saw, and I saw, and I saw, 7 times. Up to that point in the fall of Babylon, it's all, and I heard, and I heard, and I heard. And he heard the Hallelujah chorus. And I love to tell people, the Hallelujah chorus in Handel's Messiah is celebrating the collapse of world economy and the closure of the banks and the crash of the stock exchanges. Hallelujah! I said the only people who will be shouting hallelujah when that happens are the Christians. The world will be mourning when we sing the hallelujah chorus. Hallelujah! You're celebrating the collapse of the stock exchange. Every bank doing what Barings has just done. Hallelujah! I'm serious. And just as this prostitute, Babylon, this prostitute who is seduced with money and pleasure the world, disappears, the bride appears. And in fact, you've got 2 women at the end of Revelation. They're not persons, they're personifications. It's a tale of 2 cities. Babylon and Jerusalem have always been 2 opposing cities. And so before the bride is married, and like every good romance, the Bible ends with a wedding and they live happily ever after, you get 7 visions. And immediately after the 7th, you go back to, and I heard. Now, once you cross out 20 and 21, you see the 7 visions clearly. It's a sequence of 7 visions. And I've just put them out for you. The first vision is of the King of Kings on a white horse, the Lord of Lords, coming with a sword to deal with the armies of the devil. The second vision is of the angels inviting the vultures to come to the Last Supper of the carcasses of the slain. The third is the Battle of Armageddon, in which the Antichrist and the false prophet are not killed but thrown into hell alive, the first 2 human beings to go to hell, even before the day of judgment. The next is the saints and martyrs reigning with Jesus, and the first resurrection, at the end of which, the 4th, is Satan. Now listen, this is not the binding of Satan. That very title has misled. It's the banishment of Satan. There are 5 verbs. He's not only bound, chained, thrown, locked, sealed. No one can persuade me that that's where he is today. And to interpret the binding as limiting him a little bit is just playing with Scripture. He is bound, chained, thrown into the abyss, locked and sealed so that he cannot deceive the nations. How anyone can apply that to our present era, I just do not know. It's the total removal of that dreadful being. Then the saints and martyrs fill the political vacuum and reign with Christ. And the scene is earth, not heaven. The whole scene is earth here. The word earth, underline it, it's all the way through. It's happening on earth. And of course the martyrs can't reign on earth unless they're resurrected. So this is the first resurrection. It's the beheaded who come to life. How anybody can say that is conversion, I just do not know. The beheaded come to life. And in the very next verse, come to life is agreed by everybody to refer to the resurrection of the body. So you can't suddenly make a word change its meaning from one verse to the next unless there's a very clear indication of doing so. But see, what I'm saying is, I can only make sense of this scripture one way. I believe the others are twisting it to say something it doesn't say. Then comes the vision of the day of judgment. When books are open, the book of life is open. And the final vision, the new heaven and the new earth, New Jerusalem. Now that is a sequence. Can you put it down again so we can see the whole thing? That is a sequence of events. Most scholars agree that 19, the first vision, is the second coming, but I've even found some commentators try to make that the first coming now, which would mean that at the cross Jesus banished the Antichrist and false prophet to hell, so we'll have no more problems with him. But not only that, the later visions refer back to 19 as something that has happened already, so that even internally the evidence is that this is a sequence of events. And nearly everybody I know takes 1 to precede 5, to precede 6 and 7, that the second coming precedes the judgment and the new heavens and new earth. Then by what right do they take the middle bit, which refers back to what has already happened, and make it a recapitulation of something before 19? In other words, what many do is to say 20 precedes 19. That's what Hendrickson says. But how can you do that when it's presented as a sequence and later events refer back to earlier in the sequence? It is that series of 7 visions which convinced me the millennium comes after Jesus' return, plus all the confirmation elsewhere in Scripture which I put in the book. It's 11 o'clock. I must finish. I would just say very briefly that your view of the millennium has a profound effect on your hopes for this world, not your hopes for the next world. Is there any hope for this world? I believe basically post-millennial political has the highest hopes for this world. They hope to take it over before Jesus gets back. But I think it's a mistake. I think dispensational premillennialism has the lowest hope for this world of all. A very high motivation for evangelism, but none for social action. If Jesus could come tonight and take me away, what's the point of trying to make the world better? I believe that we've got a naive optimism, pessimism, and a realism to face again. I believe those who believe this world will never be any better, and Jesus better come and finish it off and introduce the new heaven and the earth. I think that's pessimistic. I think it's optimistic to believe we can take it over before he gets back. But to believe that when he comes back, we are going to demonstrate with him what this world can be like with the devil out of it and Jesus back in. That gives me hope for this world. And it gives somebody something to work for. That environmentalist I told you about who said, Jesus will need me to clean up this world when he comes. He's getting ready for it. I'll put you in charge of 10 cities. We shall reign with Christ. I do believe we shall take the world over, but not without Jesus coming to deal with the devil first. Then we stand a chance, and we get ready for that. But beyond that, of course, that's temporary. But I believe God wants this world to see Jesus as he is, and every tongue confess and every knee bow, and see him reigning, and see what God meant this world to be, and not just write off this world. I can't believe that Jesus is just coming to end history, but to bring it to an end, a telos, a consummation, and show what it could be like before ever. And the final release of Satan at the end of that reign, I see the point. Because even people living in a perfect world with peace, prosperity, justice, food for all, and people dying at 100 regarding as premature deaths, I see all that. And yet people resenting the censorship and the imposed government of Christ. And Satan getting hold of them at the last and saying, well, let's get rid of them. Because that shows that the real issue on the day of judgment is, are you prepared to live under the rule of the Lord or not? There's nothing more but to divide the human race. And just to bless you at the end, I'm going to show you a bit of the New Jerusalem, just so you can have a nice thought and not go away and say, ooh, you know. All right, here it is. I want to give you now absolute scientific proof that the Bible is the inspired Word of God. How about that? Some years ago, we began to be able to make pure light, laser light, straight light, instead of the bounced waves we were used to, and polarized light. And if you've got polarized sunglasses, it only lets in straight light, and the bounced light from the waves can't get through. If you take two lenses of polarized sunglasses and you superimpose them at right angles, they go much darker. And that is now a really very strong filter for light. We call it cross-polarized light. It's very pure light. Not as pure as laser light, but pure light. Now, if you take all the precious stones that we know, that we give to our wives, and you cut a very thin slice of those precious stones and submit them to cross-polarized light. This was discovered about 20 years ago. Then all precious stones fall into one of two quite opposite categories. One category, which we call isotropic stones, lose all their color and just go like a bit of black coal. But the other stones, which we call anisotropic, go all the colors of the rainbow, no matter what color they are to start with. They may be red or green or blue, but they can suddenly go all the colors of the rainbow, but different colors. Now, the 12 gemstones of the New Jerusalem are all anisotropic. They are all stones that in pure light go all the colors of the rainbow. Diamonds are not there. Rubies are not there. Garnets are not there. Because they lose all their color in pure light. Nobody knew that 2,000 years ago except God. John the Apostle could not have known which stones were beautiful in pure light. I'm going to show them to you. Top 12 stones are the stones of the New Jerusalem. Can you imagine what it will look like? The bottom stones, diamonds. Did you give your wife diamonds when you got engaged? They'll be no good in heaven. Look at that. And those are the 12 stones from the high priest's breastplate. And nobody but nobody could have known that except God who made them. And the most beautiful thing to me is this, not the stones, so that's going to be beautiful. It's a real city whose builder and maker is God. Abraham looked for it. It's coming down out of heaven, here to earth. But the real amazing thing is the angel says, behold, in Welsh, look you! It's a kind of it's a kind of wonder. Look, the dwelling place of God is now with men. No, we're not going to heaven to live with God forever. He's coming to earth to live with us forever. And we shall see his face. And the throne of God and of the Lamb are in the midst of the city. We won't need sanctuaries, temples, or churches anymore, because they'll be right with us, living there. No symbols will be needed. We shall see his face. God's coming to live with us. Of course, he was here at the beginning, walking in the garden, in the cool of the evening. He's coming back here. And that's our future home. Heaven is only temporary, waiting. Some of us may never even see heaven. No hallelujahs to that. If I'm still alive when Jesus comes, why? I'm just going to help him with this old earth and then get into the new one with him. And the whole universe will focus on a new earth where we shall serve him and worship him forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever.